Hi, Ben.
Hi, Byron.
This is Byron York with the Washington Examiner, and I'm here with,
Ben Smith from Politico.
and we've decided, since we don't really know anything about any other news, that we're going to make this an all-campaign edition, right?
Speak for yourself, Byron.
By the way, did you see that Washingtonian Magazine has published a glowing profile of Dominique Strauss-Kahn that was printed and put in the mail before the recent unpleasantness happened?
About his anonymous retiring Washington life.
Have you ever heard a better argument for websites? Really?
I hear that's the way things are moving.
All right. You actually just did a story just hours ago, maybe minutes ago, about the hottest story in the 2012 race is actually the 2016 race that Joe Biden.
Yeah, we're moving on from 2012 here at Politico. We're in self-parody mode. Though this was actually, to me at least, quite interesting. Joe Biden was having dinner with a bunch of big donors in Cincinnati last week, and unprompted, and this is sort of what interested people, he just sort of brought up that they should keep it. He might be running for president in 2016. Depends on his health, depends on the political conditions, but keep him in mind. Don't sleep on Joe Biden in case anyone was inclined to.
If he ran, he would be, I believe, 70 years old in November of 2012. So 70 years old on Inauguration Day in 2013. That would make him older than Reagan was when he was sworn in. So I think it would make him the second oldest president ever after William Henry Harrison, the guy who got pneumonia and died shortly after his inauguration.
I'm sure that's what they'll put on the placards.
I think that Joe Biden,
not as old as the guy who got pneumonia and died.
Not as old, but older than Reagan, and of course John McCain would have been the second oldest guy if that had happened, but it didn't. So anyway, actually,
it's a hard thing to imagine, but you never know.
Well, no, he's a vigorous fellow, and I mean, and Republicans did pay a price for having a vice presidential candidate without presidential ambitions, or at least who wasn't going to run, so that you had a two-term Republican president leaving office with a wide-open field inside his own party, which was not the most orderly process that they could have hoped for, and having a vigorous vice presidential, a running mate ascend to the top spot would have probably brought a lot more order. So Democrats are facing that in 2016, it seems.
One way or the other. I mean, Joe Biden may not be vice president in 2015, though, in 2016. So, which brings us to President Daniels.
President Daniels.
Yeah.
Well, first of all,
you may have been following this more closely than I have, though I was following it pretty closely. And I guess I still don't fully understand what happened there.
Yeah. Did you think, if I had asked you Saturday night, do you think Daniels is running, what would you have said?
I think I would have said no. I think at this point, if somebody's not running, they're not running, basically.
I would have said he's going to run. I thought he was going to do it, and was surprised. As a matter of fact, I was at an event in Washington on Saturday night, talked to a number of kind of plugged-in people about it. Everybody thought he was going to run, and so then the question was, how is this whole family thing going to play? That is, the fact that in the 1990s, his wife left him and their 4 daughters, and married another man, didn't work out, returned to him. And how were they going to play this episode? And it was the consensus, I guess, of most of these people that it wouldn't be fatal. You do a 60-minute spot, you sit on the couch, you hold hands, you show that you love each other, and that any further inquiry into this is nobody's business, and then you move on. So everybody seemed to think that it was surmountable. And then, even as we spoke, the press release was getting ready to go out. Not just the press release in which he said his wife and his 4 daughters, didn't specify whom among them, had vetoed the thing, and then another press release to the Indianapolis Star defending his wife and offering a few details we didn't know about the whole matter in the 90s. So
yeah, it sounds like they had a more normal. It wasn't just that she left; they had a real custody fight. It sounds like, which seems basically normal. I mean, I don't know. It didn't. It just like good luck attacking him on that. It just struck me as really an odd reason to get out. And now he actually, he went through the bad part. Like, it's now been written about and chattered about, and the New York Times pulled the court records. Like, it wasn't really nothing else was really gonna happen, I don't think.
Well, I think you tweeted something a while back. You said after the Times had first written about it, you said, now that it's gotten out and nobody cares, can Mitch run now? And
I was wrong, obviously.
Well, yeah, that was wrong. But the fact is that people didn't really know about it. It takes so long for this stuff to really seep into the public's mind. And as far as the people I talked to, they didn't find Daniels at fault in this, obviously. But it disturbed some of them and didn't bother others. Kind of broke down along gender lines. Some men saw him as kind of weak in the whole thing. Women, I guess admired the fact that he took her back and was a good father to his daughters and everything. But it had not gotten out. Maybe the chattering class has been chattering about it, but there has been really it hadn't gotten out, and certainly in the primary states or in the public, I would say most of the voters either didn't know about it or certainly didn't know as much as they would.
And most people didn't know who he was, so it seems unlikely they would know the details of his marriage. I mean,
Right.
It's funny. I basically, it didn't interest me that much, but a friend of mine said that this is the original version that was sort of in circulation that had her leaving the kids, which I think turns out really not to necessarily have been the case at all.
Well, he said that she took a
but
house
in
close
that
to him
version,
in Indianapolis. Yeah.
In that version, according to my very anecdotal, my friend was fascinated because she, who like I has some kids, said, every mom at some point just totally fantasizes about leaving the kids, and thus this is really fascinating, but then doesn't. So, I don't know.
So, I mean, it
seems like a reasonable fantasy.
It happened, and I have to conclude. I mean, with no inside knowledge of this, I mean, he offered unbidden this explanation for what happened. And he didn't talk about a lot of other reasons. He didn't say, "I've just got things I've got to do in Indiana," or "I want to become a motorcycle repairman," or anything like that. So I have to think that this was a really pretty major factor in his decision.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is, in a way, seems like he probably put a lot of stress on his family in a fairly unpleasant way.
Yeah.
And now Tim Pawlenty is the new Mitch Daniels. I mean, why, you guys, it wasn't you, it was National Review, your old home, carried a Stanley Kurtz column a couple weeks ago that said, why is everybody running around saying, why can't we have a fresh conservative face with a great record and, kind of flawless presentation? Because we've got him, it's Tim Pawlenty. And I think it's sort of sad. Pawlenty is running around saying, like, I'm the guy you're waiting for. And why isn't anyone taking that seriously or not seriously enough?
Yeah, it drives them crazy. First of all, Pawlenty really thought that he was going to get the nod to be McCain's vice presidential choice in 2008.
And that's when he kind of got the taste of it in his mouth?
He really wanted to do it, and he thought he had it, and for a while there I did too. I think I may have left Denver, I'm trying to think back, thinking that it was going to be Pawlenty, and discovered otherwise. But anyway, he does have a lot of ambition on that score, and it has driven them a little crazy that of all of the problems that people have with candidates, certainly with Romney, they have specific issues about Romney. With Gingrich, they have specific issues about him. If Huckabee had run, they would have had specific issues about him. But with Pawlenty, he seems to be just dismissed as a guy who's just not all that exciting. And you're finally hearing some people saying, you can't just dismiss him that way. By the way, he has a heck of an ad team. I thought his new video that he did, kind of rolling out his rollout, was very good. But in the
they're a little one note for me. I think I want to see some muted, interior scenes.
Oh, so you want to see You want to see something just grittier, perhaps, maybe?
Yeah, so a little more subtle.
In the early stages of his campaign, he seemed to be kind of almost wanting to yell to get attention. Hey, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And that gave him a kind of a mouse that roared quality to some of his statements. Now he seems to be smoothing out and I guess they would say finding his voice, and is going to look, better and better now that there's no Daniels in the race and that there's no Huckabee in the race and that Romney is still in all the trouble that he's in with Romney Care, Obamacare. So, and for Pawlenty to have scheduled his own rollout the day after, the weekend after Daniels gets out of the race, he's got to think that's a good sign.
Yeah, you're right. That's great timing. Well, I think John Huntsman, in a different way, thinks that he can step into the Daniels space, be the fresh face, the conservative governor. What do you make of his sort of two-footed jump into this thing?
Yeah, the interesting thing about it is that's going on now in the base is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically Huntsman in the last few days has said that he would have voted for the Ryan budget, that he would vote to repeal Obamacare, and a whole bunch of other basic, solid, conservative commitments. Mm-hmm. And yet there's still this feeling that he's a rhino in some way. It could be that he is kind of the darling of the old McCain team, and we know that John Weaver, the guy who had run McCain's campaign in 2000 and 2008 until it blew up, I guess actually in 2007.
This is the old McCain team.
Yeah. But that a number of people who were in the sort of original John McCain maverick appeal to the independents, kind of stick your thumb in the eye of Republicans, which McCain certainly did in 2000, are for Huntsman now. On the other hand, Huntsman's positions just seem to be, they are what they are.
He was the governor of Utah.
He's a solid conservative.
He was the relatively liberal governor of Utah, basically, but that still puts you pretty solid.
He's the governor of red. But he's the governor of Utah, so and then of course the Huntsman people are trying to point out as much as they can. Well, look, his position on civil unions is exactly the same as George W. Bush's position, so just don't get agitated about it. I think the bigger thing is, why do you think he seems to be such a media favorite right now? It is interesting that he goes to New Hampshire, and I wasn't there. Did you go?
I did not.
Okay.
We saw him together in South Carolina, though. We
saw him together in South Carolina, where there was a pretty good media turnout for a pretty non-political appearance, a completely non-political appearance, really, giving the commencement speech at the University of South Carolina. But anyway, there's this apparently very big media contingent with him in New Hampshire. And do you think it's just because he's new, or is there something about Huntsman that appeals to the same thing in Republicans that they liked about McCain in 2000?
Well, he's not being all that mavericky.
No.
It's, what I think, what the media has liked about McCain at various points is his willingness to take shots at his own party. It just makes things interesting.
Right.
To me, just straightforward as a matter of coverage, although I don't think this really has much impact on the race. I think I'd like to talk to Huntsman. It'd be interesting to talk to because he's the only one of these guys who, has real experience in foreign policy, which, although it may not be the focus of the presidential campaign, is the most interesting thing happening right now. So I think that sort of puts him in a position where he's going to be interesting for reporters to talk to. I don't think that really plays into the race beyond just being, interesting stories coming from an interesting place in an abstract way. Although it's hard to see how that kind of meets up with being the Republican nominee for president.
Well, Republicans desperately need that in their nominating process. And as a matter of fact, I think it would have been a good idea to have John Bolton on stage for some of the debates, just to have a guy who could talk about foreign policy. And Huntsman
the Herman Cain stuff on that front has been so painful.
Yeah, that was he did not do himself any favors on Fox News Sunday with the whole right of return thing. Although, did you see what Jim Garrity wrote about that today?
No.
He basically said, the Republican electorate doesn't care. They don't believe there's ever going to be peace in the Middle East. And they have so many more concerns that Cain is addressing that are far more important to them than whether he's familiar with the right of return. I mean, I don't know if Jim is correct on that. I suspect that he probably is for a certain part of either party's base. But certainly with all the political types who look at Cain's performance, if you couple his talking about not having an Afghanistan policy in that May 5th debate in Greenville, and then you add it with what he just said to Chris Wallace on Fox Sunday about right of return, right of return, then it comes up with, it turns into some glaring weaknesses.
Although he drew this enormous crowd in Atlanta over the weekend, I saw figures of like 10,000 people.
Yeah,
I do not think anybody else in the field could pull a crowd of 10,000 people if they paid them, right?
No, they're.
What's that about?
Well, I think there's. I went down. As a matter of fact, after the Greenville debate, I went down and talked to him. Went to a fundraiser at a house in the north of Atlanta. It was a 42,000 square foot house, which was astonishing. Not Cain's house, not at all. Anyway,
was that John Edwards' house?
Yeah, it was a 42,000 square foot house, and it had a life-size replica of a street in Tombstone, Arizona, that the owner had carefully modeled on the set of the movie Tombstone, which I think had Kurt Russell in it.
That sounds understated.
And Cain stood in the recreation of the Oriental Saloon, and that's where he signed books and took photos with the big donors. Just another evening on the campaign trail.
Did he have big donors?
Huh?
Well, these donors. This is going to be a real thing.
These were not like 35,000. These were people who gave $2,000, I think. You could get into the fundraiser, I think, for $150. If you gave $2,500, you definitely got some time with Mr. Cain. Anyway, the next day I went out to his office, which is on a golf course south of the Atlanta airport. So the deal is, why do people seem to be so taken with him? And certainly at the fundraiser, everybody was saying kind of the same things that the Frank Luntz focus group said. He's real. He's himself. He's got common sense answers to our problems. When he doesn't know something, he has the guts to say he doesn't, and that he'll follow a businessman's process to come up with solutions. They're enormously positive about him.
Well, there you go. It's remarkable that the only candidate we've been I'm not sure the only one, but the one we haven't mentioned so far really is Mitt Romney, who
well, now we haven't talked about
quiet and picking his. Who else haven't we mentioned?
Well, we haven't talked about Gingrich.
Gingrich.
Yeah. Now I don't. Now, tell me if you know anything more about this. I mean, I'm a little confused by the crowds that they say Gingrich is drawing in Iowa.
They seem like good crowds.
I know.
He's been working in Iowa for a long time and has a lot of friends there.
Well, I haven't been out there, but it does indicate that a couple of days after a Meet the Press performance in which people like Bill Bennett are saying this is over for him as a serious candidate. He no longer merits serious consideration as a Republican candidate. That's it. So after he's just being written out of the presidential race, he's drawing pretty big and apparently fairly positive, enthusiastic crowds in Iowa. So
that's what comes with being a Washington outsider.
There you go.
I do think that this is always. I think this is sort of an exaggeration of something that's been true all along of him, which is that. He was always regarded as in some ways, a serious person inside the Beltway, but I don't think, but not really. And he has a lot of enemies in Washington who have hated him for decades in the Republican Party for reasons that go back decades. And And I think, I think I've often been surprised in the early states, which he's been working very hard for a long time. He's just taken as a very serious person, totally on his own terms, by a lot of Republican activists, who are grateful that he's been out there, not just this year, not just last year, but for, he's been working Iowa for a long time. I think there's a lot of friends out there.
So do you say that you personally buy this idea of him as a Washington outsider?
Oh, no, of course not. I mean, he lives in McLean and has, I think, since the early 90s. And I mean...
But you're saying it's a plausible way to present himself in Iowa.
Yeah, and I think he has, in fact, done the groundwork. I mean, I do think there's this perception gap. There is an insider perception of him as this sort of, can't help himself, bombastic, kind of will ultimately destroy not only himself, but possibly the entire field of candidates if he's allowed on stage with them.
Yeah.
I think that's the insider concern. I think outside the Beltway, he's seen as a really serious conservative figure to be, kind of reckoned with on his own terms, and there's less of that. I don't know. He always, I think, for a long time in Washington, he's sort of a punchline, and I don't think that's true outside Washington.
Yeah, but the problem is, I think even in the country as a whole, he certainly has no better than a 1-to-1 favorable to unfavorable ratio. And that the more he gets back in the news, the more people who didn't really like him back in the 1990s remember that they didn't really like him. So I think that's going to be...
Right, I mean, it's as though, Nancy... maybe this is a bad comparison, but, if Nancy Pelosi were to seek the Democratic nomination 10 years from now or something, having done nothing to change her public image, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of baggage.
But it is interesting that at the same time he was being just read out of the race by a lot of prominent Republicans, seems to be doing okay in Iowa. And as a matter of fact, correct me if I'm wrong, I think on Friday, Mitt Romney is going to make his first visit to Iowa this year. I mean, he's literally not been there.
I think it's been more than 200 days. I had a little clock running on my blog for a while. He's doing dipping a toe in Iowa and South Carolina. South Carolina.
And people in Iowa and South Carolina have been saying, "Where's Mitt?" I mean, because in 2007, Romney was the second biggest advertiser on WHO in Des Moines after the Monsanto Farm Chemicals Company, and in front of the Bayer Farm Chemicals Company, which are usually the top two advertisers. Mm-hmm. So he dropped so much money in Iowa and South Carolina. All these teams of people who would love to have some of his money are saying, "Hey, where's Mitt? Where's Mitt?" And he's just literally has not been there. So do you think that means he's just... Well, let's say, what do you think his strategy is now?
I mean, I think there's this sort of exquisite... expectations game where they're trying to, that he has huge liabilities but also some big assets, and they're trying to thread this needle where they don't raise the expectation too high in Iowa, but then they meet or outperform it, and then they crush in New Hampshire, and then basically limp on through South Carolina to Florida, and then to this long run of states where, with proportional representation now coming out of the electoral votes in those states, I think the idea is just to slog it out through the spring and early summer of 2012, against whoever's left, and to outspend them, grind them out, and Romney has done this before where the others have not, and he's ready, I think, in a way that the other candidates are not necessarily ready for this process.
That's actually not a bad strategy.
No, it is.
In the sense that...
there is a problem of, he's got the dog food ready to deliver to the dogs, and it's just not clear if the dogs are going to eat it. I mean, that's a related problem.
But people do know, I think, from their own lives, that they're facing a choice they're not too excited about. And there's a particular outcome they'd really like to avoid. They are familiar with the scenario in which they sometimes end up with precisely the outcome they kind of hope to avoid. And I think that could be the case with Romney this time, because he's simply a very solid candidate.
I think he's sort of underrated in certain ways. Watching Huntsman in South Carolina give a speech to a big crowd, in a perfectly good commencement speech. You know, Romney over the years has learned how to really give a speech until it lights up a big stage, which is not easy. And I don't think there's anybody else in the field who can necessarily do it. And I mean, I just think there are certain sort of fundamentals of a candidacy that his having done it help him.
So do you think that Romney, I mean, occasionally certainly members of the base that didn't like Romney, they found him kind of phony and this was the whole flip-flop issue, especially the issue of abortion, in which he ran for governor and Senate in Massachusetts as a strong pro-choice candidate and then turned around on that. So they still don't like him for that. But he's thought of as a guy who sometimes works too hard to win over people in the room. But it was your sense, and we both watched the Huntsman speech, which was pretty unremarkable, I thought, that Romney would probably have a better public likability factor.
You know, just if you didn't know who he was, just getting up on a big stage and giving a speech. I mean, for instance, he has, it's something he's pretty good at this point. Mm-hmm. It's either, the learning, he's up at the top of the learning curve on some of this stuff, I think, in a way that, So, I mean, I don't know if that compensates for the fact that there are large chunks of the base, and that will just never vote for the guy. Yeah. Which in some ways maybe could be liberating. But I mean, I'm not underestimating his talent. I'm just saying he's not dead.
So now, I guess that is everybody. We've talked about Herman Cain. We've talked about Pawlenty. We've talked about Daniels, Huntsman, Gingrich, Romney. If we can just
somebody
leave
else out there though.
Well,
Bill Kristol has this eternal faith that there's some Deus Ex Machina candidate who's going to drop in from the sky in August. Is this total fantasy at this point, or what? Are some of these guys really still thinking about it?
Well, I think that, first of all, there has been for a while a waiting for Superman scenario. Just going back to this trip to South Carolina, that the state GOP had their dinner and convention. I can't tell you how many people I talked to.
We forgot to mention Rick Santorum, Byron.
Oh, see, there, and as a matter of fact, he won the straw poll there because he showed up.
Consider him mentioned.
Well, a lot of it's involved. Showing up does a lot.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many people there were just hoping for another candidate. Either Chris Christie. Christie was probably the one most of them named. Occasionally they wanted Paul Ryan. He's also very high on their list. Nobody really mentioned Jeb Bush, which was interesting because after the Daniels thing, his name seemed to pop up again. But they clearly would like some superhero to swoop in out of the sky and save them from this field. My sense is it's not going to happen. The field is pretty much set the way it is right now, with the addition of Michelle Bachmann, who I think will get in.
Yeah, and will be a force, particularly in Iowa.
That's true. Do you think the field is? Do you see any plausible scenario of somebody jumping in the fall, say?
I mean, I just sort of think that the kind of people who become president are not the kind of who get their party's nomination aren't flaky. And if you want to run for president, you had a lot of time to think about it and to organize yourself around it. And the serious people who were seriously running did and have gotten themselves organized and are running. And the idea that you would just sort of wander in August does not seem serious in some way. And I think basically the kind of people who get their nominations tend to be pretty serious.
Do you think Chris Christie, who has said flat out, I am not ready, could plausibly come up in a few months and say, I'm ready now? Do you think he could actually plausibly do that?
I mean, plausibly to who? I mean, no. I mean, yes, sure, he could jump in. He'd get a lot of attention. People would certainly, some people would rally to him, the people who were left. But I also think, he's from the Northeast. He's liberal on a lot of stuff. He's flipped on a lot of stuff. Would as he was trying to run for president, be defending what would have then become a really rapidly deteriorating political situation in New Jersey. Like if he were to start running for the Republican nomination, his numbers in New Jersey, which have been which were quite good for a Republican, which are no longer that great, would become really, really bad really fast, and it would become a real problem for him to govern the state. He'd have to really decide that he didn't want to be governor of New Jersey anymore. And I think he wants to be governor of New Jersey, and I think that's ultimately the reason he's not going to do it.
Yeah, I just do not see how he could he could do that after everything he's said and the preparations he has not made.
He just doesn't seem to be doing it. I mean, why? I don't understand why Bill and other people are up there kind of gazing longingly at him.
I don't know. They're also gazing longingly at Ryan, who.
Is that going to? Are they going to keep gazing longingly at him after tomorrow, though? When a House candidate in the safest of Republican seats gets wiped out by association with him?
Yeah, I can't say that. We'll have to talk after that particular election.
If she does, but even if it's just that the party got a really bad scare, it just seems like it hasn't been that long since that vote on the Ryan plan. It just seems to me that.
Well, there's two. The one thing you bring up about the Ryan plan, which is really kind of interesting, is should Paul Ryan have the power to determine the budget position of the entire 2012 Republican field? When I talk to people who were angry about what Gingrich said, a lot of their anger was with the style of the way he said it. When he called it right-wing social engineering, that really grated on them.
The bombast.
So I'm saying to them, so in other words, you could express reservations about the Ryan plan. You could say it needed to be changed, or it wasn't the right thing right now, or or you had an alternative. You could do that and it would still be okay, right? And they said, yeah, but the problem is the way Republicans seem to have structured this is that the Ryan plan is really the only conservative alternative right now. So
all these House members are on the record voting for it. So if you're the nominee and you're not supporting it, you're throwing a couple hundred members of the House under the bus.
So its effect on the presidential field has been really to lock them in, or to make them uncomfortable, or make them position themselves in some funky way, or ultimately to twist themselves into a pretzel about it. So I think that
I think there's a way around it. I mean, Pawlenty, and I think this is presumably where Romney will be too, is you say, I have my own plan. It has a lot in common with the Ryan plan. It has some differences. The differences happen to, be to sort of soften the really sharp political edges, particularly to make the Medicare stuff optional. I mean, that's Pawlenty. It's like Ryan plan plus make everything you don't like optional.
And then, of course, how does Ryan respond to that? Because, of course, he sees that, correctly.
Ryan's been very open to that.
He sees it as a way to kill his plan, though. I mean,
he may see it that way. I don't know.
To make it all optional means that it just kind of doesn't really work anymore.
I mean, has he said that? He was asked about specifically of making the Medicare thing optional, and said that he was open to that, and it seemed interesting. So.
Well, I think he's open to that in the sense that he doesn't want to seem closed to any changes in his plan, and that this is, that he's presenting it on stone tablets. But I think there's kind of a feeling in the Ryan camp that doing something like that would be kicking the can down the road and not making the changes that need to be made. But there's no doubt, I think, that the emergence of the Ryan plan at this time in the campaign has put the field in a funky position. Those who might not, either they're not fully on board, intellectually, or they just think it's risky politics. In any event, it's created, and now then you had what Gingrich said, which was the right-wing social engineering, and now you have Scott Brown saying that he won't vote for it. So it's given Democrats just some of the best talking points they could possibly wish for.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you saw it. I mean, I thought this was sort of a telling thing to Glenn Thrush's and Jake Sherman's story today in Politico, where suddenly, they had a dozen House members, some on the record, some off, and operatives saying, you know what, we warned Ryan not to do this. We warned Boehner and Cantor not to do this. And that story just struck me as kind of the beginnings of you can kind of feel the herd starting to stampede a little bit in the opposite direction.
Well, I mean, it could be.
And I don't know how far they'll go. And obviously, once you've voted for something, you're kind of stuck defending it.
Yeah, I mean, they're just with it now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll see what happens about that. But it's really been a problem for the field. So your feeling is there's not going to be another candidate other than Bachmann, not going to be a major candidate come into the field at some late date, a la the Crystal scenario.
I mean, I just don't see it, right? I mean, yeah, I don't see it. It's a perpetual feature of these races that party gray beards or stroking their beards and, wishing that somebody were jumping in late. I mean, think of Al Gore and, Hillary Clinton in '04, Al Gore in '04. On the Democratic side, it's something for us to think and talk about. But I just don't really see the mechanics of it. And I also just think that the sort of qualities that make you a good candidate for president, do not involve dithering and wandering in late because you read an editorial and changed your mind.
And anything that happened really beyond the next month or so would look pretty darn opportunistic, it seems to me, right?
I think so, right? I mean, it's not like there's somebody who's. I mean, Jeb Bush, I guess, is to some degree the exception, although his name, is a huge liability, not just with Democrats, but with there are parts of the base that don't necessarily view the Bush legacy as perfect. And while certainly he's an establishment favorite, I mean, I think the establishment really doesn't have a candidate, doesn't have one of their own. But I don't think there's somebody who would sort of unite the establishment and the base, particularly not after Daniels.
So since I think we're probably getting to the end of this here, let me ask you one last question about news coverage of the Republican primary race. And it's going to be different from the last time in the sense that the last time there was this embarrassment of riches where you had these two big primary battles going on in the Democratic and the Republican Party. And so a lot of, some reporters jumped back and forth between them. Some covered one particularly. Now everybody's going to be focused, until the general election at least, on one race. Does that make any difference in the coverage of the Republican primary race?
I mean, I think it's a big challenge in a lot of ways. I mean, because as you say, covering quote-unquote the re-elect is just a very boring thing to do. Because basically the White House is driving strategy. And government becomes strategy. It's sort of, you don't cover it like a campaign. And in the meantime, the Republican race doesn't have the sort of like kind of cultural riveting story of Hillary Clinton against Barack Obama. I mean, so maybe at some point some of our news organizations will pull some of their reporters off this race because it's not getting the clicks that primary did. But as you say, at the moment, there's this massive infrastructure of reporting that was kind of built out in a way around this incredibly compelling two sets of primaries. It's now focused, entirely on poor Tim Pawlenty. You do wonder if it's going to kind of tear him to shreds, or at least it just brings the microscope so close to a race that in normal circumstances wouldn't necessarily be compelling that much media coverage because there wouldn't be the kind of reader interest in it.
Right. So in other words, I mean, the worry is too many reporters. Huh?
I mean, the thing is, you and I would have been, pressing our faces to the glass in either case, right?
You're beginning to break up. I have to confess. Try that one more time, if you would.
I said you and I would have been pressing our faces to the glass in either case.
Yeah. But the question is, it could be a situation in which there are too many reporters pursuing too little news, even more than normally. I
think that's right. What do you think? What do you think happens?
I don't know.
You start fighting.
Should I go cover golf? Maybe that would be a way.
Or sort of like fist fights at press conferences over availabilities with deputy press secretaries.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how the candidates will deal with it. I know that, certainly the Republican candidates are going to have more, they're going to have more representatives from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Politico, the networks. They're going to have more of them chasing them around than they did in '08. And does that mean they clam up, or I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. There should be a big media constituency here. Right, and since the Republican sort of tendency, and Democrats sometimes do, is kind of run against the mainstream media, how does having this giant herd of them in tow all the time affect that?
All right, well, I think that is probably the end of our gala campaign edition.
Always good talking to you.
Good to talk to you. I enjoyed it, and I'm glad I didn't get an opportunity to show how little I know about Israel's 1967 borders or other compelling issues of the day.
Exactly. Next segment, you're going to be on foreign policy.
All right, listen, great to talk to you, and we'll talk to you later.
Absolutely. Take care, Byron.